coming up on this episode of the Roundtable. Eddie Izzard has a hilarious routine about this, that Napoleon tries to invade Russia and he goes, "Oh, it's a bit cold, I'm going back." And then Hitler says, "I've got a brilliant new idea. Oh, no, wait, it's the same idea." I mean, this is almost exactly a picture of the American presidency's relationship to the debt crisis. Like, you've got the Grace Commission under Reagan, you've got there was a similar effort under Clinton, then there was DOGE. And every time it happens, and I think we said it on this podcast, it's like, okay, well, here's another, like, maybe this is a new idea that's going to come up with some brilliant, they're going to find $1 billion in savings somewhere under the rug. And it's like, oh, no, it's the same idea, still doesn't work.
Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast here at the American Mind and the Claremont Institute. I am your host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of the American Mind and the Claremont Review books. I'm joined by Mike Sabo, managing editor of the American Mind, and Spencer Clavin, Claremont Review of Video Games editor and also associate editor of the Claremont Review books.
CRB, the video game, coming soon for GameStop near you. Yeah,
it's a turn-based 2D black and white game, of course.
Yeah,
with lots of ancient trivia.
Exactly.
You get stuck in a room and you have to answer questions about political philosophy to exit.
Oh no! Next-based adventures are extremely Lindy, I will say. So yeah. if we were careful, it'll just be playing the game. Will just be my daily job, like the experience of reading CRB and editing it.
We were bantering about video games, old and new, before we came on. Hence the Spencer's new title. Well, we wanted to start today by talking about our good friend Mike Anton, who has a profile from Eli Lake out in the Free Press. I talked to Eli about this maybe 3 weeks ago, so I'm glad to finally see it out. Mostly on background, but I got a few quotes in there. And Eli, the pitch ahead of time for this from Eli to me was, when I first read the Flight 93 election, this is Eli speaking to me on the phone a few weeks ago, I thought, it was a little overcooked, maybe a little nuts. He said, but now it's basically the skeleton key for our politics and our current MAGA populism. And Mike is a prophet, and so I want to do a full profile on him. Let me just read the opening paragraphs so you can get a flavor for it. I encourage everyone to go check it out. The title of it is called MAGA's Machiavelli, The Quiet Rise of Michael Anton. I'll read a little bit and use it as the occasion to remind everyone about Mike's interesting and twisting career through politics and the corporate world. And I encourage you all to read more of his stuff and be confident and grateful that he's serving in this administration, because he's doing a lot of good work. This is Eli's opening. Over the weekend, Iranian envoys met with their U.S. counterparts at the Omani embassy in Rome. At the table was Michael Anton, a senior State Department official with a penchant for charcoal brown suits, Italian neckwear, and fine wine. Earlier this month, I will add to that actually because Eli doesn't know, Mike is also a long time to stay in shape swimming enthusiast and also a weightlifter. Anyway, I digress.
He does even lift, bro.
He does even lift, bro. That's true. Earlier this month, Anton was in Istanbul. He was sent by the Trump administration to keep tabs on the first face-to-face talks between Ukrainian and Russian representatives after 3 years of war. It seems that wherever Trump's highest stakes diplomacy is taking place, one will find Anton. His name is not known to most people outside of Washington, but inside the Trump administration, Anton has emerged as one of the most important intellectuals behind the president's foreign policy revolution. In an administration beset with, at times, bitter ideological divides and an often chaotic style that has shocked both allies and foes, Anton has risen to the top by playing his cards close to his chest and deftly navigating the right's warring foreign policy camps. Anton has accompanied Secretary of State Marco Rubio on all but one of his overseas trips. He has been a key negotiator on U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's team to forge a Ukraine-Russia ceasefire. And last month, he was tapped to lead the technical talks with Iran over a possible new nuclear deal, a key role for any potential agreement that relies so much on devilish details. That Anton would emerge as such a trusted figure in Trump's America First movement would be a surprise to anyone who knew Anton before 2016, that is, before his viral pseudonymous Flight 93 election essay, and before Trump shocked the world with his election victory. Back then, while now Vice President J.D. Vance was warning that Trump was, quote, cultural heroin, Anton was insisting that he might be the only man who could save the republic from the rot and ruin of the left's march through our institutions. This is quoting Anton, a line probably many of you know from Flight 93. Trump, alone among candidates for high office in this or in the last 7 at least cycles, has stood up to say, I want to live. I want my party to live. I want my country to live. I want my people to live. I want to end the insanity. With a mix of provocative broadsides in the media and unglamorous behind-the-scenes work in government, Anton has charted an improbable path from the heart of the neoconservative establishment to the core of the new MAGA foreign policy establishment. Over a decade in which the American right has been defined by bad-tempered, friendship-ending fights, Anton, a Machiavelli scholar, hasn't just survived the America First Revolution, he has helped to shape it. As Anton's star has risen in Washington, I spoke with a dozen of his friends, ex-friends, and colleagues, and with DC insiders to understand how a man who once wrote speeches for former President George W. Bush and former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and contributed pieces to the now defunct neoconservative Weekly Standard, came to be the nation's chief explainer of Trump's foreign policy. Anyway, it's a good piece. Eli and Mike have known each other for many years. Mike says of Eli, he's one of the few honest, good men in Washington, and I would have to agree with that. Eli disagrees with, I think, Claremont and Mike Anton on some foreign policy stuff. Eli is an unapologetic neoconservative. He would say as much, and so we depart on some things, but he's largely doing good work and honest work from his own perspective, and it was good of him to write the piece. I just want to remind everyone of Anton's career, which is, it sort of recalls to me the anecdote I heard from, sorry to name drop, but from Clarence Thomas when I had the honor of taking like a 3-day seminar from him with a few others at Hillsdale 22 years ago now, maybe. And Thomas said, and he said this publicly, he said, young lawyers or aspiring lawyers ask me, how do I get to the Supreme Court? And Thomas says, you can't think that way. It's kind of like getting struck by lightning. And it sort of speaks to Thomas's improbable winding career through, Senate staffer to heading the EEOC to then a federal judgeship and then the Supreme Court. Mike was working at the Claremont Institute in the 90s and was trying to finish up his PhD, was a little short when Pete Wilson's office called Larry Arnn at the Institute and said, I need a comms person. And Larry sent Mike up to Sacramento. And Mike's dissertation and the last few courses of his PhD have been incomplete ever since. But he's went from Pete Wilson's office to work for Rudy Giuliani. He later would advise Giuliani's presidential campaign. In the meantime, he went to go work for Condoleezza Rice at the George W. Bush first administration, did some speechwriting at the CIA, sort of for Condi. These jobs that you're often kind of detailed across parts of the administration. And then Mike went into private life and private corporate world in New York for many years. Among other things, Mike got a culinary degree for fun because he would volunteer his time. Well, Mike read his way through Julia Child's 2-volume The Art of French Cooking long before it was cool or they made a movie about it or that chick wrote a book about it. And so he sort of thought he'd maxed out cooking for friends and family. So he started volunteering on the weekends for a brasserie in Manhattan, and then went to culinary school. I forget what order that was. What else? Mike, people should know how interesting and fun Mike is, even though he can be kind of dour and pessimistic in person if you've known him a long time about the future of America. He is an encyclopedic knowledge on the sort of tail end of the race to build the fastest steamship, cross-Atlantic steamship. He knows wine very, very well. And as Eli mentioned, Mike has been a longtime admirer of high-end men's fashion in the Savile Row variety. So he's one of the best dressed men in the Trump administration, if not the best dressed man in the Trump administration. And so he now is back in a Trump administration. He served in the first one as head of strategic comms for the National Security Council, and is now, as we've mentioned before in recent months on this podcast, running the policy planning staff at the State Department, kind of in-house think tank, first started by George Kennan. Mike, I like to say, he's kind of a company man in that he serves his principle and is very competent at what he does. He works and writes quickly, always has. He's spent many years amassing an encyclopedic knowledge of foreign policy and diplomacy, and studied, long before that, the political philosophy of the American founding and political philosophy as such. So has a wonderfully rich knowledge of how regimes work, what a good regime is, and a lot of practical knowledge about how an executive branch works in this kind of post-administrative state. Or post-administrative state is too optimistic. We're not past it yet, but sort of post-constitutional administrative state, or half post-constitutional administrative state, in which President Trump and other modern executives work. Let me just close. I mentioned California, and Michael Brennan Doherty at National Review liked Eli's piece too, and had I think a pretty good encapsulation of what influenced Mike, in addition to all the things that I just listed. And this is Michael's paragraph. I would add one angle to Lake's profile, which is Anton's identity as a Californian. And I don't mean that as an entrance into a discussion of West Coast Straussianism. What I mean is he is like so many other Californians who have come to Trumpism. He has almost a sense memory of the middle class paradise that existed in California, one bolstered and shot through with not just burgeoning new fortunes, but burgeoning new industries and technology. But at some point, the future that California was building flipped from utopian to dystopian. If something haunts Anton, it's the sense that institution builders have been replaced by rent seekers, that men of vision have been iced out of leadership in favor of ideological hatchet men and harridans. Increasingly, America relies on a few truly virtuous decision makers rather than on a widely shared pioneering ethos. I would wholeheartedly endorse that from MBD, as he's known online. And I will just encourage you all to read some now 10-year plus old essays from Mike about California if you're into such things. I've mentioned them before over the last 3 years of this podcast, or 4 years, maybe 7 years. I don't know. Who knows?
It's time is an illusion.
Is a flat circle.
Yeah, we have always been doing the podcast. We've never not been doing the podcast.
I would, and you can find these easily if you just Google the title that I will give you now and Claremont Review Books. San Francisco Values, a classic from Mike from 2015. How the Left Learned to Love the Super Rich. Sour Grapes, Napa Valley is California, only more so, from fall of 2011. Land's End, Machiavelli and Malibu, from fall of 2013. And then a little off the beaten path. It's sort of a California story, but it's a music story too. Mike is a huge Beach Boys fan. And so this piece from 2012 is called Paradise Lost and Regained. The Beach Boys' Smile is an American masterpiece. So it's about that album, about the history of the Beach Boys in California. Anyway, Mike can write about missile defense in Ukraine and nuclear proliferation, but also the Beach Boys, wine, California. We're lucky to have him serving in government. Okay, Ryan's monologue over.
And don't forget The Stakes, his book about, was it in the lead up to the 2020 election, I guess it must have been, but it opens with a scathing profile of California, basically as a way of saying this is the future Democrats want. In other words, if you like the pathologies of blue state government, go ahead and vote these guys into national office because this is their blueprint for leadership. And that's a really interesting and powerful argument, but also just a great and horrifying indictment of what it looks like to drive a city and a state into the ground. I was just in Austin, Texas, and it was a really funny experience because, I was there to do this thing at the University of Austin, Texas, which was extremely cool. And they're doing this amazing kind of startup university out there. And it's a Texas city. I mean, it's very much a southern city, but it's governed blue. And the pathologies of blue government are just universal. They're recognizable absolutely everywhere, even in a completely different cultural milieu with a totally different kind of architectural style and backdrop. It's really weird and unnerving to see Portland-style encampments lined up outside of, like Southern style buildings and architecture, and like in this landscape that feels like it should be run well, to transpose just these horrifying kind of slums and zombie apocalypse looking streets. I'm exaggerating a little, but there are portions of it where you're like, oh, I see. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what cultural backdrop you're up against. Like, progressive government produces disasters of the same kind basically everywhere. And Mike's really good on that too. My question about him that was raised again by reading this profile and MVD's response, both of which I really enjoyed. And I think it's good to see Anton's career getting the kind of attention and scrutiny it deserves as a significant, he is a major figure, and not that many people outside of our line of work necessarily know about him. He may like it that way, but too bad. He's headed for greater notoriety. My question about him and his place in history is like, is Mike Anton more like Aristotle teaching Alexander the Great, or is he more like Seneca advising the Emperor Nero? Like, I think his assessment of our position in history is pretty, as you indicated, Ryan, relentlessly bleak. And he's somebody that, in the best possible way, doesn't really take yes for an answer. Like, even when we win, it's only staving off the inevitable decline, which is a classic conservative attitude. So in some ways, it feels like, well, here's somebody who has really made significant contribution to the direction of the country. Maybe he will turn out to be the philosopher king that kind of like helps correct course, in which case he's more like Aristotle with Alexander the Great, at least for this particular regime. Or maybe it's all too late and he's just doing what he can to stave off the madness of the late empire. These are inexact analogies, but I'm and I suppose that we'll only find out in retrospect when we're all dead. But that was kind of that was what I was thinking about the whole time I was reading these profiles.
Yeah, he's been a huge influence on me. Flight 93 election obviously was a turn in dichotomies. Just paradigms shifting. Me going from, your basic kind of, movement conservative, whatever, pre-Trump, to just totally realizing, oh, free trade, maybe that's actually not a principle. Bombing countries indiscriminately, maybe that actually hasn't turned out well. Well, also, though, not kind of going almost, I would say maybe full on like Ron Paul or something, where you're kind of almost going to the opposite end of the spectrum, or maybe even there's somebody else who's more like that, just kind of like an ideologue, I guess. Because Ron Paul, I wouldn't put quite in that, but, somebody say from the Cato Institute or something like that. And yeah, I first met him. I was in Ashbrook as an undergrad at Ashland University, small university in Ohio. Peter Schramm is the executive director, one of the founders of the Claremont Institute and the first president of the Claremont Institute. And he brought Anton out there. And at the time, Anton was speaking on his book that he wrote under Nicholas Anton Giovanni, I think it was, called The Suit, which was...
Oh, you were at a Suit book talk?
Yes, I was. I was there. Yeah, I think it was like 2006. So I was there. He wore, I remember, I think a 3-piece suit, purple tie, maybe a white shirt. And yeah, I was kind of hooked. It's like, who is this guy? I already my interest in Machiavelli was already sparked by a few classes I had taken by that point already. And, basically followed his writings ever since. The Brian Wilson, or the Smile one about the Beach Boys, was really interesting. I think I probably part ways with him about his views on Smile. It's an interesting album, but I'm not sure it's quite the masterpiece he thinks it is. But he's just been hugely influential on my thinking, from Journal of American Greatness onto, his work at CRB, and obviously the work he's doing, on behalf of America today. So just an indispensable guy, indispensable thinker, and crucial to, if we really want to get out of the mess we're in, he is just going to be a key person in doing that in the weeks and years ahead.
Mm-hmm. And I would say Mike is, and we are at the Claremont Institute, free traders. Just not dogmatic free traders. That's, with the sort of American example being Alexander Hamilton and his willingness to indulge some protectionism for reasons of regime health. And I think that's how Trump understands what he's up to now. Trump, less of a kind of free trader. He's sort of always been a tariff guy. And, Trump has not, I don't think, contemplated the Cato Institute's maximalist defense of free markets for bringing everyone prosperity and bringing people out of poverty, and then dismiss them. He's rather just been a kind of practical pro-tariff guy. But yeah, I would actually recommend to people too Mike's essay on Harry Jaffa when Jaffa died. So we had a memorial issue, and Mike wrote, I think, one of the longer entries, and we made it as a standalone essay rather than part of the ensemble remembrances of Harry. And Mike talks about being up at Berkeley and loving Closing of the American Mind from Alan Bloom, and looking up Bloom and seeing that he'd co-edited this book on Shakespeare with this guy, Harry Jaffa, and that led Mike to Jaffa, and the rest is history. He went to St. John's to get a master's after Berkeley, and then came out to Claremont. And I think hilariously, after his parents told him no, they would not pay for him to go to culinary school after getting his master's at St. John's.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, the free trade thing is
Harry V. Jaffa and appreciation. You can do Anton, Harry V. Jaffa and appreciation. Winter 2014, 2015. Jaffa had died that January, I think, of 2015. Sorry, Spencer.
No, yeah, that's a great piece. I mean, just kind of rifling through Anton's author page on CRB would probably repay some dividends. He writes a lot and very fluently, although not obviously as much anymore. So you can forget like that he has a piece for. I mean, I had forgotten about the Beach Boys one, for example, and that Flight 93 one, like all essays which go mega viral as it did, when you go back to it, you discover that it doesn't quite say what everybody has taken it to say. It's been basically read as a full-throated rallying cry and defense of Trumpism, celebration of all that Trump is. It's become the watchword of like mega MAGA. It's not that at all. It's a kind of, in keeping with this tragic Antonian vision of life, it's the Flight 93 metaphor is like your last ditch effort. It's not like, it's like a gamble. It's not necessarily the thing that you can guarantee is going to work. I suspect that if you asked Anton now, he would say, well, it's panned out a lot better than it could have to rush the cockpit. But the other thing, you rush the cockpit or you die. It's like, it might also be that you rush the cockpit and you die. Like, it's not as if this is something that is so guaranteed to work because it's beautiful and pristine. It's like the conditions are so bad that a Trump vote is sort of the prudent thing to do. And that is potentially important if people are thinking about kind of what is this guy's philosophy and what is he putting forward. It's very Claremonty in that respect as well, that it's basically saying it's not, the world that we live in isn't perfect. We can believe in principles and ideals, free trade being a great example, right? We can think that free trade is the right way to run an economy without thinking that the right way to run an economy is the only concern that we need to take into account when living in the real world of politics and action. And in fact, like, prudence may dictate that sometimes you have to curtail certain ideals to make way for others of greater importance, yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera. All this just to say, Flight 93, the actual essay, the Flight 93 election, is not the same as Flight 93, the way that it exists in people's minds. And Anton believes what he says in the essay, not what people think Flight 93 stands for.
And I think that's an important point. I mean, there was a line where, he basically says, look, we wouldn't have to have Trump if this wasn't like a country that's like corrupt and getting even worse. So these are the times we live in. This is what we have at our disposal. This is what politics is about sometimes, is really choosing anybody, anything to help us get to a place where, the Constitution can actually reign again. The administrative state can be pared back, especially against Hillary Clinton. I think he likened it to playing, Russian roulette with a semi-auto. So it's just guaranteed a bad result. And with Trump, okay, let's take our chances. But like you said, that's far from some full-throated, MAGA defense or anything like that. I mean, it's, very carefully studied, very carefully written, very well written, sparkling prose. I mean, I try to reread it at least every year, helps me as a writer and as an editor. So it's just one of those perennial essays. I mean, it was Rush Limbaugh, I think the day after it came out, I think he read the entire thing live on air. So it's just one of those key essays that, will always be remembered. But I think in order to remember it, rightly, you do have to go back and read it time and time again. The press obviously has distorted it. Anton's now enemies have obviously distorted it. But yeah, I would say if you haven't read it in a while, go back and read it again. I think you'll find something interesting and probably find something new, find something that you forgot.
Yeah. Well, one thing Eli Lake points out in his essay is, people say, well, it's kind of, he couldn't even write it under his own name. What's up with that? And, at the time, Mike was a managing director at BlackRock, sort of the belly of the beast of New York elite finance. And, Mike's been the sole breadwinner for his family for decades. And he was taking a real risk. I mean, if he'd written that under his own name, as I think I'm quoted in the piece, given the ideological political commitments of BlackRock's senior leadership, he would have been fired, probably, very likely. So he had decent reason to write under a pseudonym. And then he finally got doxxed, as it were, maybe 4 weeks into his tenure in the first Trump administration, I think at the Weekly Standard, a little before it went totally out of business. And I think BlackRock, for a little period of time, tried to exact some revenge, but then gave up, which Eli notes in the piece. And also, we shouldn't, on this podcast, at this publication, in the tradition of the American founding, we should not have to defend any American's right to write under a pseudonym. It has a long and storied tradition in the West and in America. So that should settle that. Speaking of diplomacy, it's time to talk Ukraine, Russia. So Trump this week on Truth Social, or maybe over the weekend, had a post where he expressed exasperation with President Putin and saying, I don't know what happened to the guy. He's gone crazy. He just wants to kill. Maybe this isn't going to work out. And has since then signaled at various times that they're kind of at the point of a decision with Putin. Are they going to ramp up sanctions to try to force them to the table? Putin has expressed his conditions, which is a commitment from Europe and America that NATO will not push any farther east, including into Ukraine. Some sort of commitment along those lines, along with his ability to retain the territory he's taken in mostly eastern Ukraine. A couple of other conditions. Now, the critics of Trump's optimism in the campaign that he would solve this on day one, and some continued critics from, I would say, the neoconservative right, but not only the neoconservative right, that he doesn't get it. Putin's always been this guy. He's always been stringing him along. He was never serious about a ceasefire. That will really be put to the test, I think, in the coming weeks, as Trump tries to decide what to do to try to force Putin's hand to get some sort of ceasefire on the table. We'll see. I don't know. How optimistic are you guys, one way or the other? I mean, we should say that this Putin now, and 3 years into this, it's been pretty costly for Russia. The question is, what does that mean for Russia? Some counts say that they've lost either to death or serious injury about 1 million men. I don't know if it's even in the ballpark. It's pretty extraordinary for a 3-year conflict in the kind of post-Cold War, or even really post-World War II era. There are a couple of other examples, the Iran-Iraq War being another, which was frightfully destructive and bloody. But it sort of stands as an anomaly, especially in Europe, and has, you would think, begun to wear down the Russians. Now, if you know your Russian history, you know that there's a lot of wearing down in a nation like Russia when engaged in war. Go look at World War II, the Napoleonic Wars, etc. So who knows? I don't know. I think if anyone was going to get a ceasefire done of our last two presidents, that is Biden and his cabal of senior leadership, who turns out were actually running the country, and or Trump, it was going to be Trump. And let's hope and pray that in the coming weeks, maybe finally the bloodshed will stop.
So that's our last three presidents, right? Biden, cabal, and Trump. Trump is number one of the three.
Yeah.
First of all, it has to be said that this little episode has been the source of perhaps the funniest Trump audio to date. I don't know where it was. Maybe it was outside of. It might have been in a press briefing. Anyway, there is a clip of him somewhere expressing his consternation and frustration with Putin, and his alarm that it turns out actually Putin really does want to attack Ukraine. he acts as if this is brand new information. He's like, Putin, listen, he and I have always got along, but he's sending rockets into other people's countries. It's like, what is this? This stuff just, I mean, truly hilarious. He's got to be trolling because, yes, his critics are very upset that he made these outlandish, audacious claims that he always does, that he's going to get this fixed on day one. The minute I come into office, Putin's going to respect me. He's going to back down. Now, that has not turned out to be true in the literal sense. The question, I think, that you're asking, Ryan, is whether it will turn out to be true in the serious sense. In other words, is this something that
Selena Zito shout out? All right,
exactly. Like, is this something that Trump what Trump had in mind when he said this, namely, like, or peace and order and security will return to the global scene once Biden is removed and somebody with more sort of mental acuity and force and personality is in charge? Is that the case? And here is my completely like ruthless and sort of savage take on this, which is the war in Ukraine has been going on for so long with so little tangible effect for the average American voter, at least so little tangible effect that the average American voter can obviously link back to the war in Ukraine, that it's just not that big of a political liability right now for Trump not to have ended this war. This is completely unrelated to any moral concerns about what he should do or what the best course of action would be or even how he could accomplish his goals if he were to be clear about them and set them. It's just to say that I don't think people right now are sitting around thinking, I really desperately need this war in Ukraine to end so that X can improve in my life. There was a time when that might have been more true, when the war started and there were kind of price hikes associated with the sanctions, and when people were worried that we might put boots on the ground. One major thing that Putin has achieved, and I'm not saying this with any delight at all, just the opposite, is he has managed to protract this war in the Russian way long enough that it is simply the state of affairs that most people now take for granted. We just live in a world now where Russia is kind of constantly assaulting Ukraine. And as you said, Ryan, if only somebody had thought to invade or wear them down economically or do something to stop Russia. Oh, wait, every major regime in history has found that that is an extremely difficult task. And so until something really becomes difficult for us, for America, about this war, I don't know that Trump will have like a huge incentive to just really make a top priority out of ending it. Could change. I mean, this could become enough of a liability for him. I hope to God it doesn't become that via like serious, geopolitical or even military problems for us. There are other ways that it could happen. Like it could really become major in the news. Putin could do something atrocious that just everybody finds untenable. Right now, it does not seem like the political incentives are there for him to take the time, effort, and political capital it would require to like really hold Putin's feet to the fire. And that is kind of what you would have to do, because Zelensky at this point is like a non-entity. Like, he's played all his cards and he is just a known quantity. And now Trump has to get tough with Putin, which so far he has not really found it expedient to do. That's my take.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, you look at what Americans are actually thinking about. I think at least politically, you're looking at the budget bill going through. It passed the House. We'll see what happens in the Senate. I mean, something eventually is going to get signed. I think Trump said he wants something on his desk by July 4th. They're looking at a lot of other things. I think JD Vance, he got blasted months ago for saying this, but, saying, look, this doesn't really have a lot to do with America or Americans. And I think obviously, politically now, certainly he's kind of hoping that we're not watching every second of this. But I think that's right, though, overall. Like, you just don't see really people really talking about this. I mean, even doing a search on X just for kind of some basic research, before even recording this, I honestly had a hard time even trying to find any kind of post by anybody with, foreign policy experience, background, that really was kind of taking into a deep dive, what's actually happening in Ukraine right now. People really aren't talking about this. Putin right now, seems to be in an interesting position. He just launched, I guess, some, drone barrage after saying that he would sit down and have more talks. So, and I guess it killed, I think it was 13 people in the capital in Ukraine. So, Trump's thinking about, sanctions. I know Lindsey Graham is out there, saying he should do this and even ramp up things, I think, against people who use, Russian gas and oil. So that, typical position that he would take. But I think Trump he's not going to back down. He's just going to keep, I think, going on this course of action. The interesting thing is he actually going to do more sanctions, say a la Biden? I don't think so. I would be a little bit surprised by that, but you just never know with Trump, though, too. He could go a bunch of different ways on this. But I think at the end of the day, the war's gone on for so long. It just kind of really seems to be at a stalemate. If we would, the idea that Ukraine could actually win this, I think for, the most excited neocons out there, possibly, exempting them. I don't think anybody thinks that at all. It's going to come. I have no idea when it's going to come to an end. I think it will under Trump. I think that promise will be checked off, and this will happen. But yeah, we'll just kind of wait and see. It's just not something that I think is really harming Trump right now. Rasmussen reported that his approval rating among voters is right around, I think, hovering about 50%. So that kind of tells you what you need to know. I think, especially with polls historically, he hasn't really kind of done that well with that kind of thing, but that's a good number for him. So unless that, I think, really starts to change, that won't even necessarily change what he does. Look at on tariffs. He's still kind of trying to continue to keep the pedal down on that, even though I think Americans overall, I think, have been a little bit disappointed with what he's been doing on that. But I think he's just going to see through it till the end.
The approval rating is interesting because it shows some statistical proof to what you're saying, Mike, which is that I think people had kind of priced in Trump's hyperbole on this question from the beginning. That is, no one really thought he'd solve it on day one in 24 hours. And they see him kind of continually working at it and talking about it. And he seems to have turned the corner on Putin's recalcitrance and mendacity. And so he probably sits where a majority of the American people do, which is to say they think the loss of life is terrible, but they don't see it that connected to their day-to-day life. They've never really bought the notion from the more overheated corners of some parlors in Europe or the neoconservative establishment at home that somehow, if we let this go, then Poland's next and Putin has his eyes on Paris or something. I'm exaggerating slightly, but not that much. He's going to go to Krakow next. That was always an absurd claim to a lot of us, and I think to a lot of the voters. So I think his approval rating, which is now, I don't know if it's quite 50%, but 50% of voters for the first time in a long time, I think over a decade, say that America is on the right track. And I think we've mentioned a few weeks back Henry Olsen's take on all this. And if Henry, I don't want to speak for him, but from what I've heard him say and analyze, if the midterms were held today and the right track and Trump's approval are right where they are, there's a decent chance he defies political gravity and holds the House, which is a rare thing in a second term midterm. So he doesn't have much incentive to change course on this other than to keep trying to press and trying to find a way to get this done. And it's just not that acute an issue for most voters, I don't think. And that's been a big change. I think it's been an interesting example of a major national political figure changing public opinion on this over the course of the last 2 years. That is, Trump changing public opinion on it, helped, I'm sure, by people's exhaustion with and lowering interest in the conflict itself, because it really, they don't see the connection to the direct connection of the national interest or their daily lives.
Yeah. Americans like to reproach themselves about this, and it does feel morally queasy to be so comfortable when people are at war. On the other hand, it's only the fact that we live in this hyper-connected information age at all that we have that sensation. It creates this idea that if atrocities are going on anywhere in the world, we, the richest, happiest, whatever, most prosperous, fattest nation in the world, ought to be doing something about it, or at least feeling bad about it. We have to confront the fact that you can only feel bad about so many things for so long and pay attention to so many things. And part of living in #our democracy is that people care about what they care about. They're attending to the issues that concern them. It's not as if the war in Ukraine doesn't have the potential to affect Americans very deeply. It's not as if it won't affect future generations of Americans, depending on how it goes. It's just that this is one of the dynamics at play in American politics. Like, it's just if it's not immediately driven home to people, they don't necessarily care that much about it. And I think Trump is extraordinarily responsive to that, Ryan, as you sort of indicated. He's just very sensitive to what people care about. And that's how he tends to
Yeah,
prioritize.
we should say the one big change over the last week is, and I haven't been quite able to nail this down as a matter of official U.S. policy. I've just heard vague reporting about it. But the Europeans have allegedly told Ukraine that you no longer have distance limitations on how far you strike into Russia, and that we are following suit and at least wink, nodding at the same notion. That could be dangerous, and let's hope that Putin doesn't decide to do anything rash because of this escalation. Let's hope instead that it's one of the things that helps push him to the negotiating table. We shall see, and we shall pray for a decent result that minimizes further loss of life, especially to the beleaguered Ukrainians who this has been just a disaster for them in terms of population displacement and casualties for a country that's always sat, well, a quasi country. And I only say that not to run down Ukraine, but just to say the weird history of the modern boundaries of Ukraine have a lot to do with its complete, really, residence within the old Soviet orbit and the majority Russian eastern part of the country. It's at the crossroads of Central Europe, Central Eastern Europe, and that's been a rough place to be for the last few centuries. Let's talk. We can finish up by talking about Musk, Elon Musk. He was always slated to kind of fade out of the DOGE stuff and special government employee status right around now at the end of May. And but interestingly, he's a couple of admissions from him I think are worth talking about. One of which was he was, I think, on CBS or something, saying, he's realized that in Washington, you can't really do anything big about spending. You just have to grow your way out of the problem. Now, this has been the line from a certain species of Republican for a long time. Starve the beast and grow your way out of it. That was sort of the Reagan administration's approach. It's interesting to see Musk kind of throwing in the towel and also saying that he's stepping back from politics and refocusing on Tesla and SpaceX, and has decided that he's not gonna. He basically said, "I'm not gonna give a bunch of money to politics anymore. I mean, I might if I decide it's really necessary, but I'm kind of stepping back." It's sort of a sad prediction of ours that came true, that Doge was good, a good thing to be done. It did great work at USAID. It's exposed the extent to which the left has been funding itself through the national coffers for a long time. But it, what we predicted or suspected would be the case turns out to be the case, which is it will have a decent effect on spending. Well, I'll rephrase that. We'll see if it has a decent effect on spending cuts. It's going to have a small one at least. The latest is that Speaker Johnson has said he's eager to get these rescissions, a rescission package that is basically putting some of DOGE recommendations into actual legislation to the tune of $9 billion from the White House. They've been making noises about this for a few weeks, but $9 billion, I mean, it's not quite a rounding error in the federal budget, but it's close, and it's just not going to make a dent. Now, will there be follow-on DOGE recommendations that are incorporated into legislation? We hope so, and that can begin to make at least a little bit of a dent in the federal spending problem. And the DOGE team, as Elon says, will continue to do its work and find waste, fraud, and abuse, and continue to unearth, I hope, the ways in which modern government is funding a certain political faction of itself. And we should certainly get rid of all of that. But real debt and spending reform will await another day. DOGE ain't going to do it.
And I think part of that $9 billion, and I totally agree. I mean, that is just a pittance compared to, I think Elon was trying to cut $2 trillion from the past budget, and now we're at $9 billion. So that should tell you just how powerful the swamp is, how powerful I mean, inertia is in both parties towards spending. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. Even Ron DeSantis kind of came out and said, look, not a cent in DOGE cuts have been implemented by Congress yet. And he also said something about, adding, that's why we need a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution and term limits for members of Congress. I would probably disagree with both those options. I think you need some prudence, and I don't think that the law in that case is going to help. I think it'll actually compound the problem. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't see this necessarily as some like massive defeat for Musk or anything. I think he just sees reality. He sees how massive of a problem that it is, how much spending is just even every year by budget. And then too, just our national debt overall. I mean, this is just a huge, huge, huge issue. But that too is not going to be fixed by some kind of quasi-government agency. I mean, this is going to have to be fixed by Congress through legislation, through responsibility, through the American people actually holding their representatives accountable. That's the only way that this is ultimately going to be done. I kind of wear my Antonian pessimism on this. I honestly don't see actually how this is going to be done until we just run up against a very, very serious issue, and that something is going to, chips fall where they may at that point. Something's going to happen. I think the math just works out like that. And I just haven't seen anybody who is, one, serious about reform, and then two, is actually politically savvy enough who's almost like a Trump about this. I mean, Trump never ran on really cutting the debt. I mean, he doesn't want to cut Medicaid. So this is not even about, oh, Trump's turning against what he ran. No, Trump never really ran against any of this stuff. But there just needs to be somebody to rise up, hopefully, who's like a Trump on this. But anyway, this is kind of where my pessimism comes out, especially on this topic. I just really don't see how we're going to get out of this until we really face some pretty harsh consequences.
We've seen the problem, and the problem is us. There's no constituency for serious spending reform. I think a lot of the reason is people, despite a certain flavor of Republican talking about it for a long time, and even a sort of centrist flavor of Democrat talking about it for a long time, people don't really appreciate how close we might be to a real debt crisis. We've been coasting on the in many ways long ago but earned privilege of being the world's reserve currency, which makes this less of an acute problem for us than it would be for other countries. And so we await a crisis, I think, before we can really do anything serious about this. All that said, DOGE was a valiant and worthy effort, and it will continue, and it will at least buy us a tiny bit of breathing room, even if it's only for a few months as the coming spend. And the other thing too is, when will the spending or sovereign debt crisis come for America? I mean, who knows? It's very hard to say. You're the best house in a bad neighborhood fiscally. That's not quite true, but given our current debt to GDP ratio and our status as the world's reserve currency, in many ways we are the worst house or the best house in a bad neighborhood. And so you could muddle along with quite large deficits for a long time, but the bill will come due. The unfunded liabilities of the welfare state are unfathomably large, and there's not enough money in the world to pay for them. Certainly not enough tax revenue or economic growth in America to pay for them. What you could do, maybe, I saw from Axios a couple days ago, the supersonic AI weekend. So the prediction of some of the folks working very closely with AI, they see a possible productivity revolution where you could have 10% GDP growth every year. And if you held spending constant, you could start to chip away at this huge problem. But it would certainly not solve it in any intermediate time frame. So it's going to be it'll be the major domestic policy issue for decades and decades.
It's pretty funny that we've made several references on this episode to Napoleon's efforts to invade Russia, followed by Hitler's efforts. and a new generation of leaders learning the same lesson every time. Eddie Izzard has a hilarious routine about this, that Napoleon tries to invade Russia and he goes, "Oh, it's a bit cold, I'm going back." And then Hitler says, "I've got a brilliant new idea. Oh, no, wait, it's the same idea." I mean, this is almost exactly a picture of the American presidency's relationship to the debt crisis. Like, you've got the Grace Commission under Reagan, you've got there was a similar effort under Clinton, then there was DOGE. And every time it happens, and I think we said it on this podcast, it's like, okay, well, here's another, like, maybe this is a new idea that's going to come up with some brilliant, they're going to find $1 billion in savings somewhere under the rug. And then it's like, oh, no, it's the same idea, still doesn't work. And yeah, I mean, another theme of this episode is just kind of the black pill about political realities. Like, you do not have the political will to do what would be necessary here, and we wouldn't like the way it looks unless, AI is going to save us all. Which, I don't know. Color me skeptical, but
Yeah.
I like Grok as much as the next guy, but we'll see.
The I forget which AI guy they were talking to at Axios, but the prospect of 10% GDP growth was also accompanied by 20% unemployment, because all of the entry-level white-collar jobs will be taken over by increasingly intelligent LLMs and AI. So it'll be an interesting decade, I think. And my hope is that we can find some way to start to really wrestle with the debt problem. But I think added to this is, people may think or read in the abstract, we have got this huge debt problem and the government's too profligate. And then you say, yes, and what we need to do about this is cut these welfare programs and entitlement programs that you rely on. And they go, whoa, wait a minute, like, I can barely afford a house. Now you're going to cut my supplemental health care. Well, I'm not that serious about the debt. That's sort of the approach of the American people at the moment. So, and there's not, despite what Bernie Sanders may suggest, there's just not enough tax revenue in the top 5% of the income class to do much about this either. So we'll see. I don't know. I think the more responsible and intelligent legislators and national leaders in the coming years ought to be thinking about this question in a detailed way and preparing the arguments when the crisis comes. I've said that maybe 3 times in the last 2 weeks, so forgive me. But I think that's probably the best you can do for now. Okay, well, we're close to the end. We should take time to issue some recommendations. I'll lead the charge. I don't know why this came to my mind during our pre-episode banter, but I want to recommend an oldie but goodie from HBO. You may be depressed by the national debt, but you can find solace and laughter in the wonderful musical interlude sketch comedy show of sorts that was The Flight of the Conchords on HBO.
Oh, yes.
With a couple of New Zealand
brothers. Say it for the people in the back.
Yeah, some New Zealanders who are comedians, and it's just delightful. I haven't rewatched it in a while, but now that it came to my mind for some reason, by revelation maybe, I'm going to go check it out again. It's a lot of fun.
They're putting kids into factories just to make cheaper sneakers. But what's the real cost? Because the sneakers don't seem that much cheaper. What are your overheads? Oh my gosh, that show is so weird. I love it deeply. And yeah, it really holds up. The parody of what's going on is so good. Okay, speaking of AI, I guess, and the question whether it's going to destroy us all or save us all or something in between. I have a recommendation, a practical real life recommendation that you can use now for how to incorporate AI into your life. Because I feel like my big frustration with all AI discourse is that it's either maximally hyped. This is going to become God. It's going to replace everything and there will be no use for humans. Or it's sort of doomerist and uncomprehending. Like, this thing is icky and I don't like what it does to books, and its prose style is quite banal and anodyne, so I don't want to engage with it. And there's sort of truth to each of these, maybe, but if you actually get on the hardware or rather the software, and you start fiddling around with it and just poking it and seeing what it does, you will discover that in current reality, like current year truth, there's a lot of cool stuff that these machines can do. There's a lot of things they can't do, and there's a lot of things you have to watch out for, just like basically every new tool. I'm genuinely skeptical that they are actually, like, I think we might be headed for peak AI, even though people are projecting out these massive increases, but that's a different issue. I've recommended, I think, on the show Grok before. Now I want to recommend Apple Intelligence's visual feature. So if you have an iPhone, you've probably already received, like it or not, the download that incorporates AI into your iOS, into the operating system of your phone. And that will mean, for example, that when you get text messages, instead of seeing a little preview of the first sentence of the message, you will find an occasionally quite hilarious AI summary of the whole thread, such as the one that I loved recently, goats seen on run, questions about hardwood floor. And so if that's happening to you, you already have some kind of large language model / deep learning going on in your phone. However, you probably haven't turned on, unless you tried to, the visual intelligence feature. If you go into your settings and you go to the part where you can assign a function to the little button on the left side, it's called something like the side button function or something. You can find one that is Apple Visual Intelligence. And what this does is it fixes a problem that currently exists with things like Grok and ChatGPT, where you can get it to do all these amazing things for you. You can get it to schedule out your whole day. You can get it to tell you how to prioritize your email inbox, but then it doesn't incorporate that into any of your other apps. Like, it doesn't sync with your email, actually do the thing for you that it can tell you how to do. This guy, once you put it into your phone, when you press the little button, you can, for example, point your camera at a card that somebody has sent you with an invitation to a birthday party, and the AI will make an event on your phone in your calendar that just scrapes all of the information from this physical paper, uses the image to put it directly into your iCal app. It can do a bunch of stuff like that. You can obviously also send it pictures and be like, how do I fix this broken stove? It does amazing stuff with that. But the cool thing about this particular part of it is that it is not cordoned off. It's not separated from the rest of your tech. So it can actually just do things automatically for you, a little bit more like the personal assistant that I hope it will one day become. Okay, AI spiel over.
So for my recommendations, I finally started watching the new season of Black Mirror. I think it just came out, so I don't even think I'm too late to the party. But the episode, I think it was the last episode of season 4, USS Callister. It's probably my favorite episode. So they actually have a sequel to it in this season. Just finished it last night. Not quite as good. I mean, there's still some good elements in it, good parts. It doesn't quite measure up, but still recommend watching it. Also, I just started watching the episode, I think it's called Eulogy. Paul Giamatti's in it. So anything Paul Giamatti, I watch, and I'll probably watch the rest of them, piece them together through, trying to work with 2 kids, 2 young ones under 2. That you may be able to even hear them upstairs now. They've been kind of loud this episode, especially. But yes, so working on Finish the Pacific, which was amazing. The second to last episode too was, easily one of the most brutal episodes of TV I've ever watched. Just showing what was going on there and what those soldiers had to face. But now on to Black Mirror.
Speaking of the Pacific, I think we've recommended this before, but it's been like years. I forget back, I think when the Pacific came out, these books were also recommended, but one in particular about the horrors of the Pacific theater. It was called With the Old Breed by a guy named Sledge, who turned out to be a biology teacher and professor maybe after the war. But it's called With the Old Breed at Pelew and Okinawa. And you can all, especially the Okinawa section of that book, we can all be grateful and hopeful that we never have to experience something like that, which is sort of dug in fighting in days and days of rain and mud and corpses. And it's awful, but it's part of our history and you should read about it. Sort of neglected theater, I think, in popular memory, at least for people who don't have some connection to it. That is a lot of the more brutal fighting for the Americans was in the Pacific and not in Europe, although there was plenty of bad stuff in Europe. Okay. I hate to end on that somber note, but such is the world, such is life. So thank you all once again for listening to the Roundtable. If you'd like to learn more about our work or support it, go to claremont.org and claremont.org/donate. Go to dc.claremont.org for all of our work in DC and publications and databases and all the rest. Go to claremontreviewbooks.com. Of course, a new issue will be in mailboxes, I think, in a week or so, and it will be up online. Is it up online today, Spencer?
Yep,
That is
it's
Wednesday?
there, and you will get a sneak peek of Chris Caldwell's excellent essay on tariffs if you go to the American Mind. We will be pulling a little bit out from the behind the paywall.
Yeah, so go check out AmericanMind.org for a couple previews of good essays, including Charles Kessler's review of this new big and the only official biography of William F. Buckley Jr. by Sam Tannenhouse, now 20 years in the making, maybe longer. And yeah, good stuff in the new issue. If you don't subscribe, you should. If you do, keep an eye out for that lovely large magazine coming into your inbox soon, or into your mailbox.
That's the LLM I want, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want any LLMs unless it's a lovely large magazine.
Nice one, Spencer.
Hey.
Thank you all for listening. Please rate and review the show, share it with your friends, and thanks to the production and engineering crew, the brothers G, Ryan, and Jake Gannon, and we will talk to you all next week.